All right, I'm going to get us started. I've just begun the recording. Good evening, everyone. Officially, whether you're on the East Coast or the West Coast or somewhere in between, welcome. I'm really glad you're here. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this art and science presentation. This is art and science number 3, Color Histories in a Contemporary Art Practice, featuring the work of Patricia Miranda. My name is Anna McGarrigan. I'm WEED's staff person. We started this art and science series to highlight the work of artists exploring the intersections of art and science in their work. And as a scientist working for an art organization, this is of particular interest to me. I really love getting to know the artists that we feature. I'm going to give a brief introduction to WEED, read a land acknowledgement, and cover a few Zoom housekeeping items, and then I'll introduce Patricia and hand things over to her. WEED is Women Eco Artists Dialogue, founded in 1996, and it's a volunteer-run collective of female-identified visual artists, writers, curators, art historians, researchers, scientists, and others interested in highlighting the intersections of art and ecological issues. If you're new to WEED, you can learn about our work and our artists, as well as view recordings of all of our online presentations at weedartist.org. I will now read a land acknowledgement. Feel free to add your own location and a land acknowledgement to the chat if you'd like. WEED's offices sit on the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County, near one of the largest shell mounds in the Bay Area. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and to other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, who are campaigning to become federally recognized, the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, who are researching, revitalizing, and preserving Ramaytush Ohlone history and culture, and the Confederated Villages of Lichjan and Sogorea Land Trust, who are working to return native land back to Indigenous stewardship. And a few Zoom housekeeping items. Please keep your audio muted. Host may mute you if there's extra noise in the background. We're recording this presentation, and we'll stop the initial recording and start a second one for the questions at the end of the presentation. That makes things easier to find later when people are viewing the recordings on our website. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll address them during the question and answer portion. And now, with all the introductions said, I'm so happy to introduce Patricia Miranda. Patricia is an artist, curator, and educator who uses interdisciplinary projects to build connections between art, science, history, and culture. She's the founder of artist-run organizations The Crit Lab and Map Space, a gallery and project space in Port Chester, New York. Whoops, here's our waiting room. She's also an expert on the history and use of natural dyes and pigments, which we may hear a little bit about today. And a theme of Patricia's work and practices are considerations of the environmental impact of the materials with which she creates her art. And she supports and educates other artists in the development of safe and sustainable studio practices. And as we're a community focused on eco art, and it was Earth Day this week, I really wanted to kind of pull that piece out to highlight of Patricia's work. And Patricia, thank you so much for being here with us today and for speaking to our WEED community. And I'm now going to turn things over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thanks to WEED. I'm really excited to be here with you all and to connect with this community a little bit more deeply. It's really a thrill. I am zooming in from the homeland of the Lenape people in Manhattan, New York City. And always have that forefront in my mind. So I'm glad to hear that I'm glad to hear the land acknowledgement too. So I'm excited to be here. I'm gonna just jump in. All right, can you see that, everybody?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so thank you. I'm excited to be here. Especially interesting to be invited under the sort of art and science moniker. I feel like the work, the science is sort of woven. I can't avoid the textile metaphors, unfortunately. Is woven throughout my work in some what may not be as, in sometimes more or less explicit ways. So I thought what I would do. So it was interesting to think about how I might speak about my work today a little bit differently than what I normally do in an artist talk. So, which was fun because I decided to bring in some earlier projects and to talk a little bit more about some of the other things that I do outside of kind of the strict studio practice. I'm going to throw a lot at you all. We'll see how that goes. I thought it would be a fun thing to do. I wanted to start with this Venn diagram, which is like many of you, I'm sure, reflects your practice, if not in actual all of the language in many ways, in the ways that artists as a tribe, I like to say, we do a lot of different things for many reasons, partly out of our following our passions and our interests, and then in the practical considerations of just what it means to be an artist in the world today. I am one of those artists that is 24/7 art. Everything I do is around art. And I think of my practice as a kind of a wheel. The heart of the wheel, which is the center of the wheel, is the studio. And everything else that I do is kind of spokes that kind of come off the center of the wheel. And so these are just some of the things that I do, or some of the ways that I think about or contextualize my practice. So I am an artist, a curator, and an educator. I'm very interested in collective and artist-run culture. I'm passionate about material culture. I think about material culture a lot, and these are sort of some of the lenses through which I both do my own work and then also work with other artists. I love to. And so these are the kind of lenses and language that I use around my practice and in working with artists. So I'm an artist, curator, and educator. And I think that's, I got a little thrown there. So, okay, what I wanted to say was art and science and art and scientists. That's what I wanted to start with. So for me, I think of art and science and artists and scientists as really starting with the same seed, right? A core seed. And that is a deep curiosity about the world and a pressing question around those curiosities. And I think that both art and science start with that. And then as artists, we are, of course, freed from any requirement to prove things, to create a thesis that has to be reproduced multiple times. We can ruminate and dream and try things out and imagine things that don't exist and play with things that do exist in lots of different ways. So I think that artists in some ways and scientists in some ways start out in a very similar place and move along. And in that way, I think when artists and scientists work together, they serve one another really well, because artists can imagine things that haven't happened yet or don't exist yet. And so we can think through things in an innovative way. So I'm going to talk about some of my other projects that I work on that are outside the studio. I am the founder of the Crit Lab, which is graduate level critique seminars for working artists. This is an image from the Alt MFA, which was a larger group of artists. Most of the labs are about max seven people that meet, the same seven people meet over a 5-month period in a fairly rigorous environment. Probably a bit more of an academic framework than many of the wonderful critique programs that are out there, working inside a pedagogy that I have developed that focuses the conversation, and a kind of analytical pedagogy that also tries to preserve and honor the sort of inchoate nature of the creative process. I love critique. I'm passionate about it, and I think about it quite a lot. And I work with some incredible artists, several of which are in the room right now. I'm also a founder of MapSpace, which is a project space that's been around for longer than I will tell you actually in years, and which has gone through many, many iterations. I'm a first generation college student. I don't come from a really privileged background. And so the DIY kind of, well, I don't know how that works, so I'm going to create it myself kind of model has been something that I've done for most of my life. So MapSpace is a project space, a gallery. We've done lots and lots of different programs. I'm going to just run through super quick some of the programs. This is a current exhibition ephemeral bloom that is on right now. If you are in the New York area, we have a couple of events coming up in May and hope you'll join us. I have had ongoing a residency program where I invite artists to take over the space for a month at a time and do a project. So these are just a few. This was a project of a couple who did the Arctic residency in different years and did this beautiful collaboration together when they returned. This was a project around the Byram River, which is the river that runs through Portchester, and they mapped the river. So this was an ecological residency, which you can tell some of my interest because they show up in the people that are chosen to kind of, or invited to do the residency. They had mapped the Byram River 100 years ago, levels 100 years ago at the current time of the residency and projected 100 years from now. And they had just mapped the river around the perimeter of the gallery when Hurricane Sandy hit. And so this project, which had started out as an ecological project, became suddenly very, very potent. And we had an amazing, I could talk about this for hours, but we had a talk with Pam Solo, who's a MacArthur Fellow who works on environmental issues, and these maps were related to the effect on Lower Manhattan. Really incredible project. This was avant-garde theater for young children. We've done micro granting dinners, and when I looked up these pictures, I'm like, I think it's time for another micro grant dinner. We had the artist Behar Behbahani did a residency doing massage and relating massaging of bodies to the kneading of bread in this really beautiful poetic residency about leaving Iran. We had an incredible month-long collaborative project with the Cute Collective. So there were, again, this is just a quick sampling of the residencies that we've had. One of the other projects that I've developed is called Alchemical Tech. And this is an educational program and that I've done over many years in schools and museums, K through 12 institutions, et cetera, et cetera. And the sort of the framework is to get people to understand that technology is not just computers. If I work with children or even adults and I say, what do you think of when you think of technology? People say computers, iPads, phones, et cetera, et cetera. And in actuality, technology is any tool that is created to be in use for our use, right? So this program is all quite analog, working with pre-industrial dyes and pigments and making colors from them and talking about the science and the history and all of that to have people open up the way that they think about technology. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as we move along if we have time. So as a curator, I've obviously curating things that I care about. So I've curated a number of exhibitions around art and technology. And when I'm doing this curating, I'm thinking about technology not, again, as solely new technology. I'm working with artists who are thinking of technology in this much more expansive way, who are pulling in new technologies, ancient technologies in lots of very interesting ways. So this exhibition had, cast glass. It had weavings that were based on the sort of analysis of facial expressions. There's 3D printed things. There was AI or VR wallpaper and stuff. So again, not artists who are not thinking only that new media is kind of this different thing, but that technology is this kind of comprehensive thing for all of us. This exhibition is quite a while ago now, and it's very interesting because these artists were working on everything from paper and pencil, facial peel, cyber bodies, and avatars, and this is really predates the current sort of AI VR stuff. Obviously, artists have been working on this for some time. So again, artists thinking about the sort of relationship of the physical body to the virtual body in very powerful ways. This was an exhibition, quite a large exhibition that I curated around the STEM to STEAM dialogue, which I have to say is sort of has stalled a little bit. And I think we need to pick it up again to insert art into the STEM curriculums. And so this again was an exhibition where artists were thinking through all of these ideas from the most analog to the most digital. There was biological projects in this exhibition. There were digital projects, 3D printing, you name it. So This is again a subject that I'm very interested in. Another topic that I've done quite a bit of work around is again around ecological issues. As you saw from the residencies, this was an exhibition at Cambridge Center for the Arts in Cambridge and Massachusetts, and this was around material lamentations, around the notion of solastalgia, which is grief for the land. So artists who are working around those projects. For example, this is Michel Lugy, who this is entirely made out of plastic, woven out of plastic. I had the great privilege of working with the awesome and amazing curator, Amy Lipton, who is sadly no longer with us, when I was gallery director at Concordia College, and we did this incredible exhibition working with artists who are engaging the environment, a really beautiful project. That's a little bit of the kind of surrounding projects. And now I'm going to talk about recent projects. And this one, let's see if this will work in here. This was a recent solo exhibition at 3S Art Space in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, of my sort of what is my most recent work. And in this project, I was thinking really a lot about the machismo of large installations. So sort of the machismo in multiple ways, both the kind of ego of that, as well as the environmental and ecological footprint of these enormous installations. And so as a female artist and someone who thinks through a feminist and ecological lens, I was thinking about how I could live into the ambition of the work while still keeping the framework, a kind of feminist and ecological framework. Repurposed textile seemed to really fit that criteria really well, because of course I could make these very large and expansive installations. The piece on the back wall is about 24 feet around, and still maintain a very small ecological footprint. Fabric is light, it packs up, it transports very easily. And so this was something that I had been very interested in. This is my studio at one point, and I'm working a lot in these particular projects with cochineal insect dye, which is a historic dye that has an incredible history, both in its aesthetic, scientific, cultural, and political history is really quite complex. And I am a material culture person, so I'm thinking through materials. I'm thinking how materials can be not only sort of a means to an aesthetic end, but also a deeply embedded part of the ideas that I'm trying to express in my work. So in the very beginning of the pandemic, I had been working with family lace at this point, at the beginning of the pandemic. And at one point I posted a video, not this exact one, but one very much like this, of dyeing some lace with the cochineal insect dye. And someone messaged me and said, you know, I have some lace. Would you like to have it? And being that family lace would be a finite resource, I was like, well, that would be fabulous, right? So I ended up receiving this amazing box of lace. I thought, how fantastic. You know, it was quite a large box, and I was pretty amazed. And so that was wonderful. I took a picture of the box, and then I got another box. And then I got another box. And then I got another box. And I got another box. And these boxes and packages started to come with the stories about the lace. This being someone whose family hid the lace in a cave during World War II. And this is chemical lace. It's not an enormously valuable by monetary standards lace, but this was very precious to the family. So I started to get pictures of the aunties and nonnies and bisnonas and grandmas and mothers who were making this lace, and not just lace. It expanded much wider than that, but the lace was really important. And I'm sorry you're now probably seeing the background of that slide, but that's right. I was, you know, I thought, including this is a 6-page handwritten note from a woman whose grandmother Bertie was making this, which we think maybe would have been a duvet cover or something. It was never finished. It's unfinished. It still has her hand markings on it and everything else. And so I realized that, this is bigger than me having lots of textiles to work with. This is bigger even than repurposed textiles. This is in fact an incredibly important historical community archive of women's lives, especially lives whose stories would not be known, not be told. And so this became I had been thinking about this in relationship to my own family and it became really a big part of the project. So this is a very small sample. This is probably the first 6 months, and this is now going on 4 years. I have a small room full of lace. So I realized that I wanted to and needed to be accountable to these histories, to the women who, and it is women in these cases, who created these textiles, and the women who preserved these textiles and kept them in the family for so long, and then felt like giving them to me was the best option for the materials to be kept and documented and then go on to another life. And so I realized that this is this important historical community archive, and I founded the Lace Archive. So what I document, I photograph and measure every single thing that is sent to me, from like the most extraordinary to the most mundane. I do not discriminate according to what kind of textile it is, because if someone preserved it and kept it, then it is meaningful enough for me to document. You can go to the website. I will just say that the website is very out of date, because this has turned into a very large project and a true archive, which will become a searchable archive according to the donor, the location, and any histories and stories that might have been told. So this project has taken on a life of its own and become an incredibly meaningful part of everything that I do. So these artworks started with these donated lace. I am dyeing, as you saw in the earlier photo, I am dyeing each piece of lace after it's documented and recorded. And I have thousands already documented and thousands more to document. So trying to get some funding to help with that, because I really want this to be a true archive. I'm working with an archivist to figure out a way to make this something that actually can be something searchable, et cetera, et cetera. So each piece of lace is dyed multiple times, dried and dyed multiple times with cochineal, in this case, with cochineal insect dye, in order to get the kind of level of dye that I want, and then hand sewn into very large wall installations. This one is about 36 feet long by about 11 feet tall. And I say that not to say, wow, look how big this is, but to say that when you encounter an object of this scale, these tiny stitches suddenly become a visible evidence, an undeniable visible evidence of all of the hands of the people who made it and the stories. And so this, in essence, is an object that is, among other things, also about the history of labor, the economic and domestic labor of women. These pieces are often adorned, if you will, with ex votos, which we know most visibly through the Catholic tradition. However, there are ex votos that are found throughout history in every culture. They are some form of body proxy, and they are generally created in request, in gratitude, in memoriam, or in devotion. And so because I was thinking of these large wall pieces as kind of mourning, M-O-U-R-N, mourning tapestries in a way, the ex votos were a part of that project. And this is just another, there are several of these very large red ones now, and any ones that are all red and are on the wall are completely material that has been donated to me, completely. There's no other textiles in those particular pieces. So as time went on, I began to get some other kinds of textiles besides lace, and I got, all kinds of things. But one of the things that showed up was aprons. And I'm often talking to artists about pay attention to what shows up. And when I first got the aprons, I thought, I'm doing lace. I'm not doing aprons. Aprons are not part of this project. And yet I was like, all right, you can hang around. This one is a pretty extraordinary one. This would have been a festival, an Eastern European festival apron. So it's a little bit different than some of the more domestic aprons that also came. But I started to think about, and then I looked at the ties that wrap around, and I thought they look like forlorn arms looking for a body to wrap around. And that felt really profound and related to the other aspects of the lace projects. I started to think about the aprons and clothing, and the way that clothing is a kind of architecture for the body. It can reshape, it can shift the body. The architecture of clothing can be liberatory and it can be oppressive, and it changes the shape of the body. I was also thinking of the histories of the kinds of metaphor of dress. And this is in Madonna del Parto, and this is this incredible image of her with this sort of vagina-like slit in the dress, and her hand in this very kind of erotic way touching the inside of the dress to indicate, this pregnancy to come. And I'm thinking of the images of the Virgin Mary as this kind of proxy body in the particular culture, that sort of stands in for women, and also is the architecture of the church. So I was thinking also about the Vierge Ouvrante, which are these opening reliquaries. And so it would be the body of Mary, and then you open it, and inside is the people of the church. And so Mary, in essence, in the Catholic tradition, is the architecture of the church. She is the house, and she houses it. So all of these metaphors about skirts and tucking in your skirts and hiding things in your skirts and all of that kind of stuff, and both the kind of conceptual, erotic, and political way that shapes women's lives became very interesting to me. So I started to think about these objects becoming quite sculptural and large. So this was designed for this space, and that ceiling was 9 feet tall, so it had to be that height. The pieces that have different kinds of textiles, both dyed and not dyed, are a combination of donated textiles and found textiles that I have, picked up along my travels. So they're not solely donated, but there's a lot of donated materials in there. And this is the interior of that. So you can see there's a kind of thinking again about the Madonna del Parto, and thinking of this kind of interior, domestic, erotic space of a body. So the aprons became, I'm like just obsessed with aprons now too. And I was very interested in all aspects of these textiles that, for example, people would send me handkerchiefs and, towels, hand towels, things that are very mundane, that would never leave the house, right? Would never leave the domestic space. And yet were made with such care, such tenderness, such labor. And I started to think not only of the economic labor, which the lace had represented, in that it was a way for families to survive. And there's I could do a whole nother lecture about that, but also about these things that were not technically part of the economic labor of the house, but were the labor of care. And so I think a lot about the labor of care inside these objects and inside the notion of textiles. And textiles, of course, always have a reference to the body, because we are wrapped in textile from cradle to grave. So these are just some examples of some of the work. This is a very large piece, and again, thinking about the idea of how could I think through a binary, right? A kind of essentialist attitude towards something such as lace or textile, and how could I so I could move away from it, I could counterbalance it, I could counter it. I thought, what if I I make it so undeniable that the aspects of the kind of assumed essentialism of something like lace or textiles to be feminine, not female, but feminine, and but I was starting to think about the other things about it: adaptable, resilient, collapsible, able to grow and scale without a large ecological footprint, flexible, strong, tensile, all these kinds of metaphors seemed really powerful to me. And I thought I wanted to kind of use a binary in a similar way with the wall pieces, that there's the aggregation, it becomes a kind of undeniability, right, of this kind of thing. So these things as very large, very soft, very, very, again, all of those metaphors that I thought became really important to me. And also a kind of unfinished, a kind of desirous, unkempt idea was really important to me. I wanted to kind of resist the kind of commodification of objects to see if I could make something that seemed like it almost might, it's so tender, it might almost kind of come apart. So So this is that piece in a different location. Again, I think of these pieces as a feminist manifesto of softness. That's kind of the attitude. Instead of moving away from that, I wanted to move really right towards it. I think so. These are some other works that kind of belong with in a kind of countering way. These are gilded glass. So it's gold leaf on glass. It's all hand done. It's not printed. I'm using vintage and an inherited gold leaf. And they're drawn by a removal process. And I think of, if you're in the space with the large pieces, and then you would encounter these other iterations in a different material language, they feel sort of ghostly, almost like an iteration and a reiteration as you move through the space, so that one could counter the kind of large physicality of the textile works with these kind of ethereal, ephemeral, kind of almost like ghostly interpretations of them. So that's just a close-up view. And there are also ones that are in graphite and gold leaf, which I'm not going to talk about right now. And then the other thing is I get to work, on fun things like scissor lifts and all of that when I'm making these objects. So I'm really able to kind of live into that ambition of the work while still kind of keeping this framework that I care quite a bit about. So with all of my projects, there is a community engagement. And why am I showing you the underneath of a table? Because at every exhibition, there is a lace donation or a textile donation place. And it has been as big a surprise to me as anyone. And in fact, this project happened to me. I didn't ask for the lace to start coming, but it did. And I sort of opened my arms, and these amazing things have happened, including the building these relationships with all the people who I meet who want to give me this lace and tell me the stories about their family. It's really, really powerful. So it has been that every exhibition, there's a place like this where there just becomes more and more bags and boxes of lace. And this is not even the end of that particular stash, if you will. I also will do sewing circles where people will come together and sew the lace, bring lace of their own, tell the stories, et cetera, et cetera. Those will happen at the exhibitions, as well as I've had several of these lace study days where in this one I invited the amazing lace historian Elena Carnegie-Lau to come in and talk about the history of lace. People brought their own family lace, and she talked about what it might be and where it might have come from, and also in relationship to the work as a way to talk about not only the history of the lace, but the people who made it and all of these histories that are really not very well known, although there is a big movement now. So so that is a bit about the artworks, in the recent artworks. So in terms of the natural materials, I've been working with dyes and pigments for decades, and it's amazing now to see how many people are working with these natural materials. It's really wonderful. I was such a a kind of weirdo for so long, and I think that a lot of the eco dyeing and eco work is really incredible. My work is very research-based, and so it's a little bit different in that I'm working with very particular materials. I'm working with dyes and pigments that have a very long cultural history in the making, in particular of paintings and books, because I didn't come up through a textile sort of lineage. And then, of course, the overlap between textile colors and the colors used in painting. So I'm very interested in the histories and stories of these materials, which hopefully I'll have time to talk about. So I will always have workshops in my exhibitions, these kinds of experimental where you get where I've been accused of giving a PhD in pigment history in 2 hours, but where we try out all these things and we talk about the chemistry and the history of the materials, not just the technical history, but the aesthetic, the cultural, the political history. These are very important to me because they're part of the work. So I'll just quickly go through some of these. These are some of these are materials that wouldn't be used in dyeing. They're mineral pigments, but it's a lot of different materials that you can see. And just tell me if I'm going a little fast because I feel like we lost a minute there. So, but I'm happy to answer any questions about any of this as we go along. I know I'm going a little quickly. So again, when I'm teaching this, and I'm actually teaching a workshop in the Catskills in August, if anyone is interested, I'm teaching this really not as this kind of outside of time. So I'm teaching also about, again, all of these other histories, the social and political and cultural histories around trade and conquest and everything else, which are really fundamental to these materials. They tell the story of culture in so many ways. And I find that really exciting. So this is some malachite. Again, I could go into much greater detail about this. And again, have done programs in lots of different places where working with people of all ages. This was a maker fair at New York Hall of Science. 70,000 people came through this. We made a lot of paint. Those are my college students. And so just to close this sort of educational part, that, it's really a thrill. Many of us are very separated from the material world. We are experiencing it through a mediated lens. And I work a lot with young people, and sometimes they've had very little material, like touch, right? History of touch. And so finding that this is the expression on the face of this young child who just discovered that the material they've been making this red color out of is a bug. So that for me is a thrilling moment. And they're often squeamish or this or that, but that idea of being connected to the material world is really, really important to me. And understanding that no matter what we think, we can't be unconnected to it. And that way we sort of unconnect ourselves from it at our peril, because you begin to detach yourself from the means of production and from the histories of those productions and the labor of those productions, and all of that. So I'm just going to do a quick through a few earlier projects, which I think kind of illustrate some of the things I've been talking about in a particular way. I did several projects that I call witness projects, because I think of these materials, not only they're actors, as well as witnesses of history. They're participants and collaborators. And I want to use that material to tell certain stories. This particular project, this is really a prototype for this project. This project has not really been fully realized in an art space yet. But so it might not look exactly like this, but these are images. This is cochineal. Cochineal is an insect dye. It is an ancient dye. However, cochineal before the Spanish conquest only existed in the Americas. It didn't exist anywhere else on the planet. Red is a very difficult dye to find in nature. They had kermes, which is the insect that was used for carpets and for red dyes prior to the conquest. It's where we get the term crimson from. And when the Spanish came to the Americas and discovered this insect, they were amazed, of course. And being the conquistadors that they were, they took this dye back to Europe, took a few tries, and it revolutionized and hid the source for almost a couple of hundred years. And it kept Spain a great power. I say often that gold gets a lot of the press for the conquest, but in essence, cochineal in some way was even more ubiquitous. So this was a project where I did an enormous amount of research on the history of cochineal and conquest. There's a lot of conquest era images, which have since I did this project, been collected into some really fantastic publications. So you can see there are lots of these, that the dress would have been dyed with cochineal, and the painting the dress would have been cochineal, the pigment would have been cochineal, the British redcoats were dyed with cochineal. And these are some of the incredible images of cochineal cultivation in the Americas in the conquest, in the time post-conquest. Cochineal people often call it a beetle. It is actually a scale insect because it doesn't have legs. Beetles have legs and scale insects do not. They fix on their food source, which is cactus. They're indigenous to Mexico and Central and South America. Most of the cochineal today is coming from Peru. And they don't leave. It's carminic acid is the dye material. It's the female cochineal insect, as the male is born without a mouth and only to procreate with the female, and then she eats him. So that's your history of insects' lives is really fantastic. But so this is a little image of cochineal being made. So in this project, people were able to sit down and make the cochineal and then dye these small linen swatches, and then a kind of ongoing continual abstract painting was built over the course of the exhibition. Another project in this series called Elegy for Forgetting. This centers around oak gall. So probably my two biggest obsessions in the dye history, even though I could, there's a lot of them, but the two are cochineal, where I've done an enormous amount of work with both historical research, et cetera, and also physical work with, and the other one is oak galls. Oak galls are a wasp nest, and that comes from the oak wasp, which is a tiny little wasp the size of a sesame seed. And the oak wasp cannot make its own nest. And so it has a chemical in the eggs, lays its eggs on the branches or the leaves of a tree, and gestates in there and gets ready to be born and flies out. Now, oak gall is interesting because it's one of the two most common inks used all throughout history, all over the world, going back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, Declaration of Independence, all medieval manuscripts before the printing press, and Hebrew Torah is still written with an iron Gallic ink. In fact, so this project was one where, just to go back to this for a second, where I wanted to use the oak gall as a witness to the history of library destruction in war and conflict. So this is a 16-foot scroll where I researched all of the libraries up to the time of this, which is a while back now, that had been destroyed, not in environmental destruction, but in war and conflict. And so the documentation is the name of the library, the time period, and what was lost in that destruction. Because libraries were very often targeted, like in the war in Sarajevo, that library was targeted to destroy the history of a particular culture. So I was very interested in that. So this separator funnel has oak gall ink that I made that slowly drips onto this scroll, drawing a new history over this kind of obliterated history. And alongside are these small images, I'm going to just skip to this, of libraries that were destroyed, obviously from the photographic era. And this one is from World War I in London. And then this is a library in Kuwait that was destroyed during the the wars in Kuwait and Iraq, et cetera, et cetera. So alongside, there are also these drawings that using Torah vellum, which is a sheep's calf skin that is prepared for Torah, and a kind of scientific language to kind of explore the oak gall, the recipe, the wasps, and all of that. And that was alongside the other materials in the exhibition. So oak gall ink is very interesting because because it is, again, one of the two most common inks. The other one was carbon ink, which is made from lamp soot, we know as India ink, right? It's a dead black. And these materials were available to people all over the world throughout history. They were chosen according to aesthetic, but also technical or scientific reasons. Because in the West, primarily documents were done on animal skin. And in the East, they were done on paper. And iron Gallic ink is caustic. In fact, the word ink comes from the Latin word incaustum, which means to burn in. And so if you were working on paper, this would eat through the documents. Animal skin is much more strong. So I always love to tell the story about the palimpsest. People who are art people know palimpsest as an artistic term to think about like layers of memory. It actually is from the oak gall ink, an iron Gallic ink, because animal skin was a very precious material, and they often scraped the skins down and rewrote over them. Because the iron Gallic ink eats into the skin, there is evidence. So you can X-ray through the later text and read the more ancient text. And in fact, it's one of the only reasons we have some of the more ancient texts is because we have been able to X-ray it. And because of the iron Gallic ink, there is a palimpsest of the earlier texts. So things like that for me are just amazing. So I'm going to wrap up very soon. I'm going to quickly go through one project. This was a project, a collaborative project that I did around oak wall ink, something that, again, I'm really fascinated with, and I'm fascinated with its history and the way that it communicates. And so I was lucky to get a grant. I invited 10 artists to join me in this project. I love to collaborate with artists. I love to find excuses and ways to collaborate. And we foraged and collected oak galls from all around the country. Sometimes ourselves. I was in touch with horticulturists who sent stuff. And so this is just quickly some images of the places that we collected. This is a Greenberg Nature Center. And just to show you a little bit, I mean, I could talk for hours about oak galls, but there are a lot of different species of the oak wasp and a lot of different species of oak trees. And so the oak galls can look quite different. All of the oak galls on this page, except for the top left, the Aleppo, were foraged in the United States from various places. And they'll look very different. Some of them will have a single wasp, some will have multiple wasps, et cetera, et cetera. These are very interesting, talking about trade. These are Aleppo oak galls. These ones here, not these are from Northern California, actually. The Aleppo oak gall comes from the Aleppo region of Syria and Turkey, I think, because one of the things that happened, and I think we're much more aware of this because of the pandemic, but this is all pre-pandemic. I have been purchasing oak galls, Aleppo oak galls from dye suppliers for many years. And the ones I would get would be, I don't have a picture, unfortunately, of the actual ones. It would be more like this, darker, very small. Still Aleppo galls, equally wonderful. But the minute the war in Syria happened, I have never been able to get them again. And now the oak galls that I get are these larger ones. I think they're coming from Turkey rather than Syria, because of course in Syria, we had one of the fastest destructions of a culture in human history. So we gathered together, we made ink from every single one of the collections, and the Aleppo galls are the most prized because they have a very high concentration of gallic acid. So they make an incredibly dark and beautiful ink. Super fun and easy to make. There's a chemical process I do with kids, and there's kids of all ages. There's always a big wow factor. And so we made ink from all of the different things, as I said. And then we collected all of the ink and we gathered together as a group of 11 artists, and we did a whole series of, well, I just want to show you this first. So people who couldn't come to New York to do this started doing it in their own places. This is a friend in Texas who did it with her students. We have people sending images of them working with the materials in their own homes across the country. And it culminated in a really beautiful, this picture does not do it justice, beautiful exhibition of collaborative drawings by the 11 artists. We did drawings in small groups. We passed drawings around. We did a whole bunch of different iterations of that. And it was a beautiful project. And I always thought that this project would continue. And sometimes when you go back and look at things like this, you're like, wait, we could do that again. Let's continue. So if anyone is really jazzed about it, reach out to me. That is me standing in front of one of these large lace wall pieces, of which there are now several of these. And here are just some of my contact informations. So,
That was incredible.
did I just whip through that at like
Thank you, Patricia. I feel like I've been sitting here. I realize I don't know if my little face is on camera, but my mouth has been hanging open for the last half hour. I am going to.
I didn't talk too fast and go too fast for everyone.
Oh my gosh, I want to ask you questions for the next 3 hours. I'm going to stop the recording and start it again, just so we have like a separated question and answer, and then open it up for questions. So give me just a moment to